I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Feud, Capote versus the Swans composer, Julia Newman. Julia, first up, before we get into the nitty-gritty of this show, as a third-generation film and TV composer, when did you know that you wanted to be a musical storyteller and follow in the footsteps of your father and grandfather?
To be honest with you, it took me a really long time. It was not something that I had any intention of doing. I think mainly because watching my dad be up in front of orchestras my entire life, it felt huge. It just felt like how is it that you are able to come up with an idea that fits what's going on screen? And then secondly, how is it then that you take on a writing and leadership role in front of an orchestra and you actually watch the ideas concretize outside of just you and yourself or you and your studio? So it was never something that I was interested in. I remember when I was in graduate school, people would say, I always knew that this was something that I wanted to do, and that was just not my experience. A lot of it was I got an undergraduate degree at Cal Arts, and I was at a friend's apartment and got offered a short film, and I think it was really as simple as falling in love with what it means to put music under picture. And then really what stemmed from there was a really amazing musical relationship with my dad that had really always been there. But I think because of his 40 years of experience in this industry, I think to be able to go to him for the most basic questions to the most complex questions as it related to politics and it related to writing, it was just there's just something about it. There's something about focusing a dramatic moment, creating dramatic architecture, how it is that you can help clarify story that I just found to be incredibly interesting, right? Not just musical ideas, but musical ideas as they relate to picture. And it's not just a matter of saying, here's an incredible thing that I wrote, but here's something that I wrote, and how does it dance with what's going on screen, with everything from the cinematography to the lighting to the acting. And it was an interesting dance that I don't know, maybe I just wasn't good at anything else.
I highly doubt that, but I see what you're saying because there's just something so special about watching a film or TV show and having the music elicit that emotion that nothing else can really replicate. It's so special. So let's talk about Feud because you are trying to help capture the essence of this bygone era with all the splendor and drama that 60s, 70s, and even 80s New York socialite high society typically evokes. So then when you're in this, what was the instrumentation that you gravitated towards to really make that shine?
To be honest with you, I think it started off with just sheer desperation of just saying, what does it mean to have an idea? Being a young composer and having 8 episodes in front of you and knowing that the music was going to be demanding in some form or another, right? It's Truman Capote, and it's this epic story sort of uh, really spanning his life, starting off, I think we start off in 1955, spanning all the way to his death in 1984. So there was music was always going to be more outgoing, and honestly a lot of it started with just here's a couple of dominant chords that I feel like I can kind of float on top of. And then you kind of start singing a tune and you think, shit, what's the best way for me to get this idea
Yeah.
approved, right? How do I do the idea justice, right? My dad had this great line that he told me where he said, don't spend too much time on anything that'll be rejected in 7 seconds or less, right? And I think that that's particularly true at the beginning of a project, right? That you want to honor the idea that you're putting forward, but I don't want to be so attached to the idea in thinking this is all I have to offer, right? Part of my job is to remain light on my toes and to maintain a sense of dramatic flexibility. So, I started off with this tune and I started off with a couple of chords that then kind of developed into a tune. And I thought, all right, I'm gonna take a risk. I'm gonna invest, have a cellist, this incredible cellist who played all over the score. This guy's Cameron Stone, who was so brilliant. And I owe so much to him. And I had him record it, and it was a scene in episode one when Babe Paley, I think towards the middle of the episode, when Babe Paley is in her room and kind of getting ready, and that's, I think, where a lot of it began.
Wow. That's so interesting to me. And when you speak about the cello, I love the combination of mellifluous piano melody that's over or with an overlaid emotional string element, that's like the gold. And I'm immediately hooked when I hear that. And a great example of that in this particular score are tracks like Treaties on Friendship or Le Coq Basque. And I'm thinking like, what do you most value about the piano as the emotional baseline in your scores?
Oh, I mean, I think there's a real clarity to the piano. You know, I think when I'm writing, there's something about sitting at a piano that it's like I can really understand and digest the verticalities of kind of my chords. So I think a lot of it started there. It wasn't a matter of saying like, you know, all right, I get it. Here it is. I'm gonna do piano. I think a lot of it is trial and error, right? Because I don't think I would ever be so arrogant as to say like, yeah, I know exactly what this needs. I have no idea, right? So I think part of what it is that piano is something that we all have. I think all of us have a MIDI piano and some good piano patches. It's a really good way to kind of begin an idea. It's a great way, particularly if you're writing modally, you can have a bunch of different ambient textures and you can still get the cut through of the piano, which I think just dramatically ends up working really well. But all of it comes down to, what does it make me feel when I'm actually putting music next to picture? That has to be the end all be all. As beautiful of an instrument that I think piano is or cello is, my responsibility ultimately is to picture. So if piano hadn't worked, then I would have abandoned piano. But I think that there was an elegance, to it, and I think also to, you know, it's digestible, it's malleable. There's a dramatic flexibility to the piano, and you can be outgoing without it being, I think, too overwhelming to the ear.
Wow. You know, speaking of writing to picture, the score doesn't shy away at all from jazzy and especially percussive tracks, even whimsy, because Capote to me, there is a lot of whimsy for him, particularly the way Tom plays him, so brilliant. Like tracks like Delirium, Tremens, and Wasps. What inspires the kind of pensive, mischievous instrumentation that I feel a lot of this score has?
So all of the women together sitting at Le Coq Basque, just
Yeah.
gossiping back and forth, these back and forths. I became much more adept at scoring these very long dialogue heavy scenes by the end of the series than I was at the beginning. But it just struck me that everybody had an agenda. And I think what I loved so much about this show is that they're kind of no good guys, but we empathize at different moments with all of the characters. Everyone, I think, inhabits a real humanness. And in inhabiting that humanness, of course, everybody is flawed. And I think I just loved the idea of Truman Capote always just kind of listening, always kind of the typewriter going on in his head, that everybody was always scheming. And I think it's actually part of what makes the story so powerful, right? That it is as shallow as human beings can get and as deep as human beings can get. You know, what does it mean to be on your deathbed and to regret a friendship lost? I mean, that
Wow.
is
Yeah.
that's so profound. So, but I think that in order to achieve the profundity at the end, there has to be this element of fun, because I think we'd all be lying if we said that there wasn't a moment where we sat around the table and gossiped and, had our ideas and plotted and schemed. Hopefully not to the extent that some of these women, as well as Truman Capote, did. But I think I wanted it to be alive more than anything, and I wanted there to be a sense of real delight, and weirdness.
I mean, I don't know about you, but I will often call my friends or text them and say, "Hey, let's get together for a drink and just do a bit of trash talk," and we flourish. And I'm going to play Wasps the next time my mates come over for a beer because it's the perfect track. On that note, Julia, thank you so much for your insight. Thank you for your time, and we'll bring you back shortly for our panel.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Based on a True Story composer, Sherri Chung. Sherri, one of the reasons why this show is so compelling is that it's genre bending. It tonally shifts between broad, dark humor and suspense thriller, and like the first few minutes are actually quite horrifying. So I was just wondering, does that present any unique opportunities or challenges as a composer when it tonally shifts back and forth like that?
Yeah, I mean, based on a true story, as you said, is a comedic thriller, and it's kind of the first comedic thriller I've ever done. I think
Yeah.
a lot of the projects that I've done in the past have been very black and white. They're heroic, they're drama, there's rom-com. It's like yeah, and you always kind of know who the antagonist is, and you know who you're supposed to be rooting for, and the pinnacle of the goal is always justice, and justice will be served, and right over wrong. And this was a story where it's like, I don't know. Should we be rooting for this guy? Is this guy as bad as he said, as bad as we think he is? Is he as good as we think he is? And so the challenge musically was, I think with a lot of these types of projects, I'm guessing is that you don't want to give it away. You don't want to telegraph what the audience doesn't know yet. You don't want to ruin the fun of them trying to figure out for themselves who they want to root for and what they want to believe in and stuff. So I think that the challenge with this the score was a bit of that, but I think the success of the entire story, from the writing to the acting to the hopefully to the score as well, I think the success is that it kind of lies within the nuance, in the spaces between the horror and between the comedy, between the funny and the the really dark, brooding, nature of it. And I almost like a nervous laugh, where it's like, like, yeah, like you're not quite committing to the funny,
Yes.
you're not quite committing to the horror of it. There's obviously times where it's very polarizing. It's like, no, this is dark, there is some stabbing, there's a murder going on, 100%, and that's just a matter of scoring what's on screen, and just really, elevating that kind of horror. So, in terms of the score, there was a lot of gritty synths when it came to that, but when it came time to the comedic, there was a lot of, just instrumentation that really, felt to me like my goal was to try and always make it as though there was a very, very tight string, a very tight string that could snap at any moment. And it could snap in a good way, like, comic relief, or it could snap in a really bad way, like our killer, could snap it. So always leaving the audience with this uneasy feeling, both with instrumentation and with, pacing and drive and other spotting choices.
Yeah. What you're doing in this is very nuanced, and I think it's actually super complicated, and it could have gone so wrong because it's really hard to get that tone correct. And for example, the credits track on the score does this really fascinating thing. It leans into the bold, pensive cues and percussive, plucky sounds that ramp up tension and danger, but in a really old school detective drama way. And I think, to me, there's a tongue-in-cheek nuance in there as well, amplifying the darker comedy elements rather than just lean into the straight-up murder mystery. Am I onto something with that?
Yes, Rob, everything you said was completely intentional, and
Perfect.
that's exactly what I was going for. I mean, but to be honest, I'm thrilled to hear you kind of analyze it, and it resonates with you in that way, because it really was my intention. Originally, when I was thinking about the project, I was thinking noir for sure. This is like true crime, true detective
Yeah.
type of thing. I mean, we're talking trench coats, fedoras. I want typewriters. I want, brooding looks, dark alleyways, and in truth, none of that is in the story, but that was my intention. I'm like, this is a true crime type of thing. And so, I do think that there was a bit of an old school element, or like a throwback to like a noir situation that we already know. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, the podcast, which is what the story kind of revolves around, is a podcast that they're trying to make, and then true crime podcasts in general, like America's obsession with that. I think that's kind of like the newer, private eye kind of
Mm.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. But to your point about instrumentation, gosh, nothing says funny like pizzicato strings. But I also kind of thought, I was like, yeah, but I wonder, you know, pizzicato can also be very tense, because again of that tight plucking type of string. And again, if you pluck it, do you break it where you laugh? Do you break it where the killer snaps and everything's gone wrong? So a lot of the instrumentation I was choosing was something that had very caustic, very, maybe not caustic all the time, but very biting sounds, and very, like the frequency was really, really cutting through. So things like, hand percussion that's very tight, has very tight, small drum heads. Pizzicato, I've already mentioned. Even a typewriter. A typewriter shows up in there just because it's got that, very sort of tight, um, you know, pointed sound.
Yeah.
And then of course the score. Well, I should, a lot of it also has these very unexpected loud bangs, piano bangs and percussion hits, just to kind of keep everybody on their seats, hopefully.
Yeah, I tried to identify all the actual instruments that feature in that particular track, for example, and I lost count. And so just talk me through the diverse instrumentation that you wanted to deploy to bring that plucky, cheeky, but also dangerous tone that you were going for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a maximalist. I don't know if that's a word, but it's definitely the opposite of a minimalist. So
Yeah.
to be honest, a lot of the challenges that I welcome in my own writing is restraint, and I think that that was one of the hardest things about this is that, especially when it came to this fast talking comedic sounds that Kaylee Cuoco and Chris Messina had
Yeah.
between the two of them, and Kaylee is so expressive with her eyes. I mean, she almost doesn't even need to say anything, and it's like her eye,
Yeah.
the way it moves just kind of says it all. And I'll admit my first instinct was to kind of add to that. And a lot of what I realized what I had to do was really pull back from that and allow that to be the case. So but again, to your point about the instrumentation is a lot of it is sort of whimsical instrumentation that's used in a very groove way, to get us, there's always a ticking. There's always a pulse going on, both to keep the tension or keep the drama moving, and then, but also to have that keeping time moment, which is like something could stop, almost like a ticking time bomb. So again,
Yeah.
with the hand percussion, very tight hand drums, or drum head, smaller drums, so it's not very resonant or reverberant.
Yeah.
That said, coupled with these very sudden, loud bangs of, timpani doing melody, and, piano hits and bangs, and harp, like those types of things. So very loud, bigger, bulky instruments that again are hopefully jarring you out of your groovy. Again, when something gets very predictable, it gets very comfortable, and so then having those moments of just like snapping it out, pulling the rug out was a lot of doing the complete opposite of higher stuff, to doing complete opposite, and doing lower, more reverby, louder booms, just really playing with frequency levels to try and play hopefully with your level of comfort, and playing with time, and time under tension.
Wow, that blows my mind because I was thinking like as a layman, just like, oh, this is really jolty and cheeky and dangerous, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. And the way you just explained it really helps because yeah, that tightness of the string and that it is precarious. And isn't that interesting how music can do that in a really unexplainable way almost, but it really does. And it reminds me that with your background, particularly in the superhero genre, like you are one of the go-to people for that genre. And then to stretch and do something like this, I wonder if the old saying, dying is easy, comedy is hard, is actually true when you're threading the needle between laugh out loud and darker humor. And we've touched on this before, but when all is said and done, did you find this particular genre something that was more challenging than you were expecting?
100%. I like I said, I kind of went into it thinking it's going to be one thing. I think a lot of us do. We go into a project thinking it's going to be this one thing, and then it ends up being something different, and you learn from the story and you grow with the characters. But yeah, like I again with it, it wasn't just black and white. This is horror. This is comedy. Or this is funny. This is hilarious. There was a lot of, as you said, threading the needle, and a lot of very controlled tension. So again, that nervous laugh, and that feeling, and that sense of you know just that very uncomfortable nature, and really showing a lot of restraint, or sometimes really letting loose. And I think some of the way that I tried to do that, even if anything for myself, was to really change the instrumentation once we got into full on horror. From there, like I said, it was sort of these darker, grittier synths. There was less live sounding or acoustic sounding things that I thought were kind of letting us really dive into the discomfort. But then on the other side, having these lighter instruments that I hopefully we're going to allow the audience to sink into something that's like, okay, we're not going to be blindsided by a jump scare at this moment, but just to kind of keep it really zany and quirky, but also just uncomfortable. But yeah, it was really difficult, and it was difficult to find that balance and that nuance. And a lot of people don't like comedy. I actually love writing comedy, But what was tricky was that this was a different kind of comedy than I had done
Yeah.
before. 'Cause it wasn't, as we just said, it wasn't just a straightforward, this is funny, do some pizzicato or some, tuba. I mean, a lot of it harmonically too, I think is something, a lot of times in major you can do, that's funny, that's comfortable, that kind of thing. And this one, I was really trying to blur the lines between minor and major and just make it something that you can't really, hopefully, identify too much as a particular key.
Yeah, it was really hard for me to put my finger on it, but it was still so compelling, and I think that actually helped me put me in that frame of mind for what I was watching on screen. So, Sherry, on that note, beautiful work. Thank you for your insight. We're going to bring you back shortly for our panel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Mr. and Mrs. Smith composer David Fleming. David, in the show, romance coexists with car chases and gunfights. And so it's fitting that the emotional tones that underpin the score are ambiguous and mercurial and edgy. And so I was wondering, first of all, what was your primary inspiration and intention for when you first signed up for the project and you were starting to work on the tone and the instrumentation?
Yeah, I mean, the primary thing that, when I talked to Donald, actually, Don Glover, at the start of this, was, he said the show's about trust. And that's, trusting your professional partner, trusting your romantic partner. And it really was kind of trying to tell those two stories, of their relationship as spies and their sort of blossoming romance as kind of one story. So the music had to serve both purposes. And, I feel like, you know, starting a relationship, there's like always an element of espionage anyway, because there's things about yourself that you're kind of holding back, and you're not quite sure what you're getting on the other side. And as another person sort of unfolds to you, the relationship deepens. And I think the same thing happens in the show, where they really are trying to figure each other out. And there's so much that they're kind of holding back about themselves, and it takes a while for them to get on the same page, which was really interesting, and I think relatable too. They're not a practiced super cool spy team. They are kind of, you know just making it work, and flying by the seat of their pants. So I think there was something really relatable and refreshing about that.
Yeah, like on tracks like Meet Cute and Snowplow and Hi Hi, I was thinking, I was getting a little bit of Run Lola Run and maybe Drive, Social Network. Like there's they're dense and they're pensive and quite layered. And a great word that you've used in the past to explain the vibe of the score is momentum. I love that you've said that, and I want to talk about that a bit more because that's precisely what the score helps achieve, I think. Talk us through how you wanted to give us the sense that we're on this really fast-moving journey with John and Jane, but it's still a little whimsical and a little unknown, and how that really kind of works with the more action-packed parts of the series.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was I just wanted it to be fun to watch. Part of it was I felt like that was my job to help it be more fun, and also like I wanted to be having fun writing it too. Like I, I've never thought about so much about like an audience perspective than when watching the show, of if I was watching the show, what would sort of engage me in this. So yeah, the momentum was huge, and kind of especially in the very beginning, because they have Francesca Sloan, the showrunner, and Hiro Murai, who directed the first episode. They just cut this really unique kind of tempo, both to how the actors interact, and how the story sort of unfolds. It's again very relatable, because there's a lot of kind of awkward energy, and getting to know each other. So it was really important that, like, when the music kicked in, especially in the first episode, that it was saying like, okay, we're on our way to something. The interesting thing, especially about how Hiro Murai directs, is that he's got this way of, you know, keeping it like simmering at like a 4 or a 5. So then when it finally kicks in at a 10, and there's a couple times where it happens, it's so shocking and engaging, because you're sort of you're sort of like, okay, I'm watching a romance. I'm watching sort of an awkward getting to know you. They're like me. They're not real spies, and then all of a sudden the story really takes a turn, and
Yeah.
so it was fun, kind of being complicit in those sort of managing the tempo of that.
Hiro Murai, by the way, is so damn good at that. He did the
Yeah.
same kind of thing in Station 11, and he does it beautifully in this. I highly recommend everybody to listen to this score on with noise cancelling headphones because it features this really boundary pushing, eccentric, percussive synth sound that I could not get enough of. What do you most love about composing with predominantly electronic instrumentation?
Well, I wouldn't say it's even the predominantly electronic instrumentation. I think for this score, it was predominantly sort of percussive kinds of things like in you referenced that Meet Cute track, which was kind of the first thing I did for the show. It is a lot of synths, and it's also like a kalimba featured quite heavily, and it's kind of the marrying of the electronic and the organic. Like what I really wanted for this score was it was actually I was listening to a Nancy Sinatra track from one of the Bonds. It was You Only Live Twice, and it starts with this sort of like upwards line. And my thought was like, if I had found this as a vinyl in the basement, and having that as like a sample and treating it more in a modern context, like a hip hop record or something, how could I approach a score? How could I like create my own samples? And so rather than it just be an electronic score, I wanted it to be framed with electronic instruments, but to have live performances and then almost treat them as if I had just discovered them and sort of sampled them, so to speak. So a lot of it was honestly just going around my room pulling old instruments that I haven't used in forever, and just like, okay, this there is that sort of first week of working on a score when you're like, what the hell is this going to be, and you just pull anything close to you. But yeah, I always wanted it to achieve this feeling of I think what the show does well in general, which is take something classic, in this case the spy genre, and how do we make it feel fresh and modern without rejecting any of those sort of you know tropes that made us fall in love with those types of stories in the first place? How do we sort of work them in lovingly? And we don't want to do a pastiche, but we also don't want to disregard. And so for me, it was really about how to make the modern stuff work with something that felt more classic.
Yeah, and that's why the fusing of the organic and the electronic really works in that wheelhouse, and it does for these. There's a really interesting mix of pensive sounds that ambivalence and tension. And I was wondering if you could explain or give us an example of a cue or a motif where you employ certain instruments to elicit that feeling of dread and mystery that is so pivotal to the show's tone.
Yeah, I'll tell you the scene that really made me feel like, okay, we're on the right track, was in the second episode. There's this where John Turturro is the guest star. There's the scene where um, he has John and Jane. They're sort of shadowing him. They're following him, and he has them uh, engage in a very specific type of fetishistic kind of role play. And they, Francesca Sloan, and she sort of pointed the scene out early on and was like, this is going to be a tough nut to crack, because she wanted it to feel like um, dread but sexy, and like it's a funny situation, but it has to feel like this weird dark ritual, sort of like if you found yourself all of a sudden at an Eyes Wide Shut party, um and we ended up doing just really sparse synth drums and like mouth percussion, and it was just this really weird kind of I don't know. It was like a cult piece. I can't explain what it was, but when we played it for them, they were just kind of like howling with laughter, and I was like, okay, we're on the right track here. I mean, the North Star for me was Francesca said early on. I was doing some Q, and she was like, "What's the art school version of this?" And that kind of became art school espionage was always the thought process. How do we do this, but not in an obvious way? How do we make this as if it wasn't a big Amazon show? How do we make it if we were messing around with our friends in art school and just trying the weirdest things possible? So that was really that was kind of what I always tried to keep in mind with doing this is like how to be surprising and have fun with just you know, being as weird as I could.
Yeah, keeping it, and you kept it quite grounded, and which I don't know why, how it works in my brain, but it made me really kind of connect with John and Jane in as regular people, even
Right.
though they're not. On that note, thank you so much for your insight, though, David. It's really fascinating. We're going to bring you back shortly, though, for our panel.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Star Trek Strange New Worlds composer Nami Melumad. Nami, Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 2 experimented with various genres and storytelling formats. A special crossover episode, there was a musical, a courtroom drama, mind-blowing existential sci-fi, action-adventure, war, you name it. So what was your highlight from Season 2?
Yeah, I think my highlight was the crossover episode actually with Laura Dex, because it provided this sort of opportunity to be a little more animated with the music, and because we basically we got some visitors from the animated show, but they arrived in in a human live action format, and then but there was a couple of moments that were still animated, so I thought it was really cool to play with our themes for Strange New Worlds in a more animated way. So that was really fun. The other thing I really enjoyed was the romantic episode. I think it was 203 with Lon and Kirk. That was a real highlight for me as well. So but yeah, it's really fun to do all these genres. I think there was a comedy episode as well with Spock and his
Yes, that's
future
right.
wife to Pring, and her parents are coming and not in the right moment for Spock when he loses his Vulcan ear. So it was a delight, really. It's such a great show to work on with all sorts of genres, as you say, and everything is within that scope of sci-fi and adventure and mystery, and there's always so much excitement in each of our shows, so I'm very happy to be working on it.
You know, I forgot about the comedy, and I also forgot about the rom-com in episode 3, Tomorrow and Tomorrow, the one where they
Yeah,
go back in time.
yeah.
You just get so much variety in this show, and that's why I love this particular version of Star Trek so much, because I just never know what I'm going to get. And but the baseline for Star Trek is that it's very always going to be ambitious in scope and scale, and it prioritizes emotional character-based arcs beautifully. So talk me through the balancing of that muscularity and bombast that is appropriate for high octane action in sci-fi, but also the subtle emotional cues in the quieter moments. Is that a difficult needle to thread?
I wouldn't say it's difficult, but there is a fair balance that I have to think through every time. I think now as we're starting season 3, it comes a little more naturally. Um, but yeah, you always sort of want to balance, those bigger orchestral moments, the big dramatic action, and the big reveal moments, let's say, or mystery, versus those nuanced conversation, like for example with Pike and Batel. Like there's so much nuance in their romance, and you want to capture that in a way that, and it evolves in the entire show. Same with Spock and T'Pring, Spock and Chapel. So I think it provides a great opportunity to install a theme and then to develop it, and with variations, and over time it grows with the characters. So I feel you know, it is within those relationships where the music can really play a lot of the nuance. A lot of times what I would do is when we have a specific star in the episode, or a specific new character, or a specific location, you know, or a specific sort of aliens, or whatever the mystery is, there would be like a grander theme for that particular sound, or, you know, stuff that would serve as like the big high octane stuff that you're mentioning. Like that would be, you know, okay, there's the Gorn, so that's the Gorn, you know, and there's very specific episodes where, you know, we'll have the full-on Gorn theme. But then I think within the characters of our show, like we have Uhura and her past and her theme. So you know, it's really fun to develop those arcs and that music with the characters.
Let's talk about the Gorn, because as the Star Trek nerd on this panel, I'm going to tell you now that that was one of the most exciting things that I've seen on TV all year. Again, need to get out more. So, season 2 finale features Lieutenant Spock and Nurse Chapel fighting the ferocious Gorn in breathtaking zero gravity, and the score is right there, amplifying the life or death stakes of the scene. So when you know what you're about to get yourself into to score the finale, what was going through your mind, and how you wanted to really ratchet up the tension orally for the audience in such a climactic scene.
Yeah, oh my God, that was an amazing episode to work on. Just the visuals were so inspiring. I mean, it's always inspiring, but that one was so grand. And as you're saying, zero gravity, like all this destruction, amazing shots. And yeah, it was just, you know, I'm like, how do I amplify this? How do I make this better than it already is? And the edit was just superb. And the actors, like everyone has done such a great job, and I think that's where music really shines. But when it feels like it's part of, you know, the rest, when all the art is coming together, you have the direction and the writing, and so the music just becomes part of it. And I feel like those kind of visuals really elevate my work. So I'm very thankful for all the incredible creatives that we have on the show. And so in terms of music, what I was trying to do is really, that was a moment for you know, the famous Star Trek motif. Like yeah, I had to include it somewhere there. And what I did was to add a lot of synths, which we have not done previously in the show at all. Like, I mean, there was some synths, but not as prominent as this one. So that was really, really exciting. And then we have the Gorn theme playing like full on, full scale. Before that, you know, if you remember in season 1, there's an episode where we don't even see the actual Gorn.
No. Yeah.
And it's all very hinted, and their theme is there, but it's not as crazy and big and just scary. It was intended to be very scary at the season finale of season 2. So that was the idea behind it. Just absolutely terrifying, and I think we captured that. So
Yeah. I noticed, I thought it was just me, because like it was like as if you had turned up the synth element more than normal, and it wasn't as orchestral, and it worked. It really did, because it's in a completely different foreign and scary environment. So let's just change it up a little, and that really worked. But I'm always wondering about what you're doing, and Jeff on Discovery, and all the composers that work in Star Trek. Are you conscious of this pressure to give the fans what they want? Because for me, the most exciting parts of your score for this show are the inspirational orchestral melodies that duck and dive into a little bit of the old flourish, but also give us something new as well. So what about that particular balance, giving us the what we expect, and also surprising us?
Well, a huge Trekkie myself, I am always tempted to use the theme, and to hint for other shows and like install all these little Easter eggs. So there are Easter eggs in this show, but I think for all composers who work on Trek, and I feel it's a very aware decision. Like you have to be very aware of when you're choosing to use um the Star Trek theme. And I think it was also very prominent in Picard. um those choices of you want to bring it when it's earned. Otherwise, if you just continue to use it all the time, it kind of loses its effectiveness. And so there has to be a very good decision about when it is appropriate to use it. I mean, think about it as like, it's like the ice, it's like the cream on the cake, or it's like
Yeah.
it's that's something we're all always so looking forward to. But yeah, it's just about balancing and being careful. And sometimes there'll be, also a question for the showrunner, like or the producers, like how big do you want us to go? And is this a moment for a big scale Star Trek theme? But at any given moment, I do think about intentionally having the feel of a Star Trek show. And I do try to honor past scores as well. I'm listening to Jerry Goldsmith, I'm listening to Dennis McCarty. I'm a huge Michael Giacchino fan. So I am and having worked on a show like Star Trek Prodigy as well, I and having done 20 episodes for Strange New Worlds, it's it's kind of finding its balance between honoring the tradition and also bringing new and exciting elements, because we're doing a new show. But I feel overall our show, Strange New Worlds, really honors the legacy of Trek. I mean, this was the original pilot starts with Pike, right? So in everything they're doing, from costumes to characters to production design, everything, and the writing itself, and the format of one mystery every time and a big arc. I feel all of this is honoring the original series so much, that music is also just one more element that does that same thing. It's like honoring what was done in the past and building on top of it.
Yeah, I think you're all aligned. Every department head seem to be aligned on this whole philosophy for New Worlds that makes it soar. It's so beautiful. Nami, thank you for your insight. We're going to bring you back shortly for our panel.
Thank you.
I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, and I am delighted to be joined by some of the most acclaimed composers working today. I've got Feud, Capote versus the Swans composer Julia Newman. I've got Based on a True Story composer Sherri Chung, Mr. and Mrs. Smith composer David Fleming, and Star Trek Strange New Worlds composer Nami Melumad. Welcome everybody to the panel. I don't often ask this question, but I feel I'm curious about what your most significant influences are on your musical life and career as a composer to date. Who would like to go first? Talk me through it. David, what about you?
The first word that came into my head is just the panic of a deadline. That is always the biggest influence on me. But for real, I think all through high school I worked in a video store, and I don't know, it was just thousands and thousands of hours of watching films that I shouldn't have been watching in a public video store, just watching rated R movies when there's kids running around. And I don't know, I've just it's always been a storytelling thing for me, first and foremost. And it's not bad to get to play around with music for a living as well.
No, not at all. What about you, Sherri?
Michael Kamen was the composer that, when I he's the one that made me want to be a film composer. And it was his score to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves that I was like, I mean, if I'd heard scores before, I'd watched movies before, but there was just something about the magic of his score to that film that just made me want to just dial in and do whatever wizardry that was. I wanted to I strive. But I've also noticed that depending on a project that I get, sometimes I go looking for some of those scores. I did another project that was based on Gremlins, and I just Goldsmith has always been a huge influence, I probably of all of us, honestly. And so but I do tend to seek out inspiration based on a project that I'm getting as well. So it's constantly changing.
That's so interesting. What about you, Nami?
Well, I like to discover things on Spotify. So whenever that takes me, and it's really interesting because sometimes it would not be the usual film scores. It would be a lot of songs, a lot of artists, a lot of bands. Um, but I actually do think that most of the inspiration and most of the ideas come from picture. And as David mentioned, I also grew up watching so many films, and I've done it as a habit, like to even in the most busy week, I'll still try to watch a film, at least one, um, or a show, or so that I stay connected with everything that's going on, and what's new in scoring, and what and be aware of previous materials, and it's just I guess my experience is very eclectic. It's like I draw inspiration from a lot of very different things. And a lot of walks sometimes, just walking outside and in quiet. A lot of ideas come then. Yeah.
Is that so interesting? Yeah, me too. When I'm walking my little dog out in the sun, it's amazing the things that come in, the creativity that you're able to then put out into the world. So, Julia, over to you. What's your primary inspiration and influence over the years?
Um, maybe it's a cop out. I mean, obviously, I used to go to sleep when I was a kid, and there was a piano in the living room, and then I would hear my dad get a tape recorder, and I would fall asleep listening to him play the piano. And so I don't know. I think also I'm fiercely proud of my dad, as a man, and as particularly as a composer. So I really do try and walk in his footsteps, looking at the kind of open-mindedness. I mean, it's so amazing to me watching him 40 years into his career still maintain just a profound open-mindedness. And then I think his ability to engage with people, to keep a cool head, to always look for ways to build bridges as opposed to put up walls. So I think in a multitude of different ways, obviously, imagine if I didn't say him though, that'd be crazy. But I think as well, I think I definitely, maybe less from film music, but Burt Bacharach and Cole Porter and Harold Arlen, but then also like being, 12 years old, in the early 2000s, like Timbaland's shock value. Like, I think it's so fun to be able to pull from so many different things. And I think different genres, different periods of time tickle my fancy in different ways. But I think at the end of the day, I just want that feeling of being surprised. And whether that's, Bernard Herrmann in Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, with the skeleton sequence that I remember watching on Laserdisc.
Wow.
Yeah, or everyone's spoken about Jerry Goldsmith. I think to be surprised and totally present in a moment, and I think if you can do those two things, count me in, count me influenced.
I want to pick up on that as a little sidebar. We've heard about Kamen and Goldsmith and Bacharach and, of course, Newman. David, is there a particular composition or score or composer that you would say was important to you in your formative years then?
Oof.
Or the two?
Yeah, I mean, my first thought was like Lady and the Tramp that score is so deeply entrenched. But I mean, everyone, I don't want to steal Julia's thing, but her dad's scores were a big deal for me, for sure. And I'm completely jealous of the subconscious genius that you must have been sort of hearing him play piano when you're falling asleep. It's amazing. And by the way, from your interview before, I'm always going to remember that 7-second rule that you mentioned. That's perfect. But
Oh,
no, I mean there's been different things all through my life. I mean, honestly, Meatloaf, when I was a kid, I was just saying this to somebody. I was like, there's something about even non-film scores of music that was like very cinematic would really like kind of just be so exciting to me. So, you know, anytime story and music happen, and it was always super exciting, and that's there's been different people along the way that have kind of gotten me engaged and excited in the same way.
I'm with you on the
so
meatloaf thing, David, because he's like so storytelling, and you have like these
Yeah,
really, really, really long songs that take you on a journey, not like today's songs, which is like 2 minutes and then you're out, but like, like a
TikTok, yeah.
4 minute intro
yeah,
and then a 5 minute body of it,
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah. I was saying
Uh,
to somebody the other day that it's also, I think, the first time I was aware that a songwriter and an artist were not the same thing, because it had like music by Jim Steinman on the bottom, and I was like, is that just Meatloaf's real name? What is? So I think I don't know if I could speak for everyone, but you know, film composing is such a kind of in the background thing. It's not like an up on the front of the stage thing. So the idea of songwriting in general, storytelling, songwriting is always been very appealing to me, and uh, you know, that was always like reading a liner notes kind of thing.
Yeah, I hear you. For me, it was Michael Nyman's The Piano. That's still in those dark recesses of my brain that I will dip into from time to time. And it's amazing how film and TV scores actually do that to us, and music in general, of course. Um, so I was thinking, to pick up on what David you just said, a film or TV score is most potent as an art form when it makes us feel something and it reinforces what's on in picture. But it also knows when music is not needed. So it's like highlighting a book. It would be pointless to highlight the whole page. So the skill is to know where to highlight. So what strategies, Nami, do you employ to get that balance right?
Well, with track, oftentimes we will do well to well. Um, but yeah, sometimes you could go less, and my approach is always less is more. So whenever I can, you know, maybe delay the music or let it so there's always a moment in a scene where things could go, into some sort of a bit more of a climax, and it doesn't have to be like a huge climax, and but there's a turning point. Maybe that's a better word for it. So I think the challenge is to find it, and whether you start there or you build to there, or something changes there, and that's usually the point of a scene, right? Like we're trying to convey a certain emotion. Um, and yeah, it's obviously a discussion with the filmmakers as well, to what they were hoping to achieve, like what they want the audience to feel. And I feel like that's one of the biggest questions, really, when you approach a film or a TV show, is how do you want the audience to feel in emotion, really, just simple emotions. It's not about um orchestration or color or instrumentation um or pace or any of that. It's just about the emotion. So once you figure out how to navigate that, whether it's the quiet versus the music, or it is the music versus music change, I think that's the way to do it. Once you figure that out, you've got it all. Like this is the one key. And as you're saying, people do take the emotion out, out with them, outside of the theater, outside of the television, right? Like we all remember the scores that influenced us. We remember the songs. Sometimes we don't remember the lyrics. We don't remember the scene. We don't remember exactly what was said, but we remember the feeling that was brought, like how we felt watching it. And that is the thing that stays with us. And I think the music has a major part in it. Um, so it's a great responsibility and a privilege to work on it.
Yeah, it sure is. Sherry, you employ that device quite often, based on true story, where you hold back or whether you give us full throttle. So what's the key, and what strategies do you employ to get that balance right?
I think Nami's right. I think we would all agree that a lot of it is a conversation with your showrunner, director, producer, who create. If you're lucky enough to work with the writer, who might be also one of those other roles, that's my favorite. But I think also asking myself a question too is like, what is the function of score? You know, what's the fun? Why is it needed? What is it doing? Because if it's just there for wallpaper, and sometimes it has to be there. Sometimes they literally like, look, it just feels empty. We don't even know why. And so then I go a little deeper and okay, you try and figure out, why that is. But I do think it's an important, question that we probably all ask ourselves, not even just like where to put music, or if music has to get into the scene set at some point, the question of like, when does it start? It doesn't start on their kiss. Maybe it starts just after their kiss. You don't want to just like, you don't want to allow an audience to feel something first, or to see something first, which then informs this is how you should feel. You certainly don't want to start something beforehand unless you're trying to telegraph something. So I mean, it's sometimes when okay, we got to get into music somewhere, then the challenge actually becomes, where do you start? And there have been times where on different projects too, where I don't feel like we need music in the middle of this whole segment, but I don't know how to get out and back in a way that isn't going to be distracting. So sometimes I think we just have to make a decision to stay in and that kind of thing. But again, just always kind of answering for myself, or even asking them the question, because sometimes they'll ask us, well, where do you think we should get in? Just what what's the function? What's the reason to have music? And I think that's, if we can answer that question, that's very informative, both for them and for us in our decision making.
That's really interesting, because I sometimes really don't like it when the score telegraphs too much, although it's so important that it does that. And so, Julia, that's something that I think you did masterfully in Feud. Talk me through what's going through your mind when you are trying to work out when and where the score should be.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think all of us are probably working at light speed, right? So part of it is just coming, just from, that pure desperation. But again, I think for the process, firstly, it's instinct. Secondly, it's trial and error. And third, it's whatever anybody's telling me to do. Because at the end of the day, I know that I'm not in charge. But sometimes what I'll play with doing is like watching where it is that, editors have temped in music, and just sort of making memory locations like throughout, to just kind of get a sense of where it is that somebody else who's watching this episode feels like there needs to be music. And then sometimes watching again, being like, okay, if I'm not listening to temp, where do I feel like music is most effectual? And then what I find I have to do is jump between the macro and the micro, right? So sometimes I'm working on a scene and I'm like, this slaps. Like, this is so cool. This is amazing. You watch maybe 2 minutes before leading into that entry point and you think, oh my God, my brain's going to explode, because I've just thrown so much at the wall that now nothing has the sort of dramatic intensity or focus that I intended, because I've totally overscored. And I think, particularly as a young person, it's the easiest thing to do, right? Because sometimes your ego gets in the way and wants to say like, I know what to do. Let me put some more notes in, right? So I think there has to be a real humility that you engage with when you're looking through and you're spotting. And typically what I do is I always bounce 2 mixes of every single one of my cues. And then I have a super session in Pro Tools. And I have the entire episode, and I am like, okay, what if the cue started a second earlier, a couple frames earlier? What if it started later? Actually, okay, what if I cut the 2 mix in the middle, and I have the middle actually now be the beginning? And what if I took what used to be the beginning, and what if then it kind of came down, right? Again, I think all of it is, how do I trick myself into being open-minded when my default position is to sort of defensively guard my ideas out of, again, this fear that if it's not this, then holy shit, what is it? So yeah, trial and error, and trying to have concrete tools in place so that I don't get stuck in any one way of thinking. Because I think you want to honor what it is that your showrunner, your editor has temped with. But also, I really do feel like it's important for me as the composer to say, here's my 2 cents, take it or leave it, right? But let's look at it, let's take out this cue in the middle, and how more potent does the scene that precedes it and comes after it, how do we now begin to understand, again, this broader dramatic architecture, as opposed to, I'm going to mix metaphors, but just the tree as opposed to the forest. You get it.
I like it. Wow, it sounds so complicated, and yet it all just seems to work. David, do you have a particular strategy that hasn't really been brought up yet?
No, I mean, I really identify with what Julia's saying, and I think you know, jumping off what Sherri was talking about before, m you know, something I've worked with Hans Zimmer a lot, and something that I kind of learned from him was, when possible, try to find longer runs. Try to find what the arc of this is. How do we make this feel more cinematic? You know, by connecting a larger story rather than. I'm always suspicious when I see spotting where it's like little bits, bit. You know, it's always, to me, it's an opportunity to say, well, how can we tell a longer story? Sometimes you can't talk. You know, like Julia was saying, sometimes you can't convince somebody that you know, your idea should win, but if you can show them, if you can demonstrate it, then it at least has a chance. And I think the most important thing is for me is to be a filmmaker on that side of the table with them, like looking at the film together as fellow filmmakers, rather than me on the other side of the table as a composer trying to be like, you know, this is what I'm trying to push on you. I try to avoid that kind of dynamic, and really just try to be storytelling collaborators that I happen to be working in music.
So just to finish up this panel, but to pick up on what you've said and what Julia was saying, Nami, is it ever really difficult to let go of something that you really believe in because it just simply doesn't work, or because the team has decided that we really need to move in another direction?
Uh, well, yes, it's always like difficult. Um, but it's
Yeah.
it's an essential part of the job, and I feel I mean I very much relate to everything that's been said, and I'm learning a lot as well. Thank you guys. I feel that sometimes it's, you know, you'll advocate for something, but at the end of the day, you have to first choose your battles and then second, you know, acknowledge that a lot of times you come later in the process. You come to the film or to the show after it has been written for what, a year or two, after it's been produced, after it went through so much, and the creative people behind it, you know, it's their baby, and it also becomes your baby as well. But you have to acknowledge that they have lived with it in a certain way, and sometimes it's best to keep it that way, because, you know, they're familiar with the story, they know what they want, and sometimes it takes a minute to understand, to get into that vision and be like, okay, well, yeah, this is for the benefit of the story, this is for the benefit of the bigger arc we're trying to tell, whether it's the entire season or just that certain episode. But yeah, and oftentimes, you know, even if I advocate for no music, eventually we are going to write music. And I'm happy for it, you know, I am happy for it.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, as you said, with Trek, there's a major opportunity to tell a big story, and I'm really enjoying that that element, and I'm glad that Hans thinks that way as well.
Yeah. All right, well, final word to you, Sherry. A similar question. It's got to be hard to let go of something that you really believe in when it just simply doesn't work, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the challenge of what we're doing, you know, being in a service industry. It's like, you know, what we decide works or doesn't work isn't really truly up to us. I mean, it's up to us, obviously, to a certain extent. We wouldn't offer it, we wouldn't play it, we wouldn't write it and show it and present it if we didn't believe that it worked. But at the same time, you know what? Thank God it's not my choice all the time, because I don't want that. Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if the show fails, if the movie fails, that's on you, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, obviously we have a responsibility, but gosh, thank goodness that we're not, you know, we're the last to the party, as Nami was saying. And it's like, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, you know what, I can still have it for my reel, I can still have it for my soundtrack, I can still have it for, you know, if we get to play it in a concert or a live setting or something like that. But gosh, you know, we have so many decisions that we have to make every single day with our music and with our teams and with our, you know, just our jobs and our art and our craft, that, you know what, it's not. I have also, and by the way, it's taken me some time to get there, because it's true. It's like, at the end of the day, what hill do you want to die on? And it's like, if it doesn't work for you, let's just leave it, let's just throw it away, you know, because it's not throw, you know, let's just move on, because it's not, it doesn't, I don't need to spend energy on that. There's a million other fires to put out. So thank goodness, I'm actually relieved. I'm like, cool, it doesn't work, fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. All four of you, thank you so much for your insight today, and congrats on some really beautiful work. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Rob.
So
Thank you,
much.
everybody.
Rob.
Great
Thanks,
talking to all of
Chris.
you.